In this video, we are going to look at how to convert between fractions, decimals, and percentages. So far, we've been looking at decimals and fractions, and we want to add in percentages. So let's review, first of all, what fractions and decimals really are. Remember, a fraction is a portion of a whole number that's represented using a numerator and a denominator, or a top and bottom number. And so it's representing less than 1. And sometimes our fractions, we'll see mixed fractions, we will have a whole number portion of it, but the fraction portion of the number is representing a part that is less than 1. So 3/4 or 3/4, as this is known, has a numerator of 3 and a denominator of 4. And if we look at that visually, we can have a shape like this that's cut into 4 equal pieces, and I have 3 of them. Now, a decimal is a non-integer number that uses a decimal point to separate the whole number from the fractional part. So it uses a decimal point there in order to represent the whole and the fractional part. But they're both different ways of showing a value and how much we have of something. Percentages show that as well. So it's another way that we can represent a value or how much we have. And percent means out of 100. So it's always basing how much you have based out of 100. And the reason I'm talking about this is because when we're trying to convert between a fraction, decimal, and percentage, if you can remember what the number is, what a fraction is, what a decimal is, what a percent is, then it makes it a lot easier to convert between them instead of trying to memorize a formula or a series of steps. So if you can remember that percent means out of 100, then that can really help you when we're talking about conversion. So for example, if we want to convert between a fraction and a decimal, we know in a fraction that the top number displays how much I have, and the bottom number displays the total, or how many parts make one whole. In a decimal, the decimal side of the number is going to be out of its place value, so a tenth, a hundredth, a thousandth. And so if the fraction is out of 10, 100, 1,000, it becomes really easy to write it as a decimal number because you're thinking about its place value. So 30 out of 100, you know that the 30 is going to be in the hundredths place. So you end up with 0.30, which means we can then drop that last 0 because it's an unnecessary 0 there, and I end up with 0.3. Now, if the fraction is a nice fraction out of a 10, 100, 1,000, then we need sort of a different method. And the way to do that is to think of the fraction as a divide, a division sign. And so we can divide the top number divided by the bottom number in order to get that same answer. So 30 divided by 100 gets us 0.3. So what I'd like you to do is try the next two, 3/4 and 3 4/5. So try those two, write them as a decimal, and then start the video back up when you're ready. Okay, so 3/4, we're going to do 3 divided by 4, and we get 0.75. Now for 3 4/5, the 3 is our whole number, and in a decimal, the whole number goes in the front. So we know our answer is going to be 3 decimal something. And to figure out the decimal side, I'm going to do 4 divided by 5, which equals 0.8. So my final answer is going to be 3.8. Okay, if we want to put a percent into a decimal, we can follow the same process that we did with a fraction. To go from a fraction to a decimal, we divided by the bottom number, which again, the bottom number represents how much makes a whole. In a percent, 100 is the whole, always. It's always out of 100. So instead of dividing by our denominator, our bottom number, I'm going to divide by 100 every time, because in a percent, the bottom number is always 100. It's always out of 100 to make one whole. So in this case, I did 30 divided by 100, which is 0.3. Okay, so pause the video, try the other two, and start it up again when you're ready. Okay, so for 25%, I'm going to do 25 divided by 100, and then I get 0.25. And for 8%, I'm doing 8 divided by 100, and I get 0.08. Now be careful, any percent that's less than 10 is going to have that 0 in front. So it's not 0.8. Be careful there. That is 80%, which is quite a bit different than 8. So just be careful there with your percents less than 10. And if we have a percent that's more than 100, so let's say 115%, I still do 115 divided by 100, which is going to give me 1.15 because I have one whole 100 plus 15 more percent. So I have one whole plus 0.15 more. Okay, so now I want to go from a decimal or fraction to a percentage. I'm just going to undo what I did before. So to go from a percent to a decimal, I divided by 100. So now to go from a decimal to a percent, I'm going to multiply by 100. So 0.3 times 100 gets us to 30%. So can you try the other two and then start the video up again when you're ready? Okay, so I'm going to do 0.075 times 100, and I get 7.5%. Careful here, it's not 75%, it's 7.5%. And a good indicator for me is I have a 0 in front of the 7, and so I know it's going to be a percent that's less than 10. Okay, now I have 4.5 times 100, and I get 450%. I know it's going to be more than 100% because I have a whole number there. My whole number is 4, so I know it's going to be at least 400%, and in this case it's 450%. Okay, and for a fraction, what we're going to do is first put it as a decimal and then multiply it by 100. So if you remember going from a fraction to a decimal, we did the top divided by the bottom. So to go from a fraction to a percent, I'm going to do top divided by bottom and then times 100. This is most commonly used by students when you're trying to figure out your grade. You got your test mark back, you want to know what percent it was, you do top divided by bottom and times 100. So in the first example, 30 divided by 100 and then times 100 is 30%. Or we can just see, since it's already out of 100 in our fraction, and we know percent means out of 100, that the top number is going to be 30. So our percent is 30. So try the next two and then start up the video again when you're ready. Okay, so I have 3 divided by 4, and then I'm going to times 100, and so I get 75%. And then our whole number at the bottom, we know we have a whole number of 3, and so our decimal portion is going to be 3 decimal something. So I'm doing 4 divided by 5 gets me 0.8. So I know my whole decimal is 3.8. I'm timesing that by 100, and I get 380%. Okay, and lastly, let's look at how we put these numbers into a fraction. So to put a percent as a fraction, we need to think about what our bottom number is going to be. So the 30%, 30 is how much I have. I have 30, but out of what? And we know percent is out of 100, so our fraction is going to always be out of 100, and then we need to reduce. So I get 30 out of 100, and I'm thinking, what number, what's a common factor between 30 and 100? It'd be 10. So I can divide both the top and the bottom by 10 to give me 3 out of 10. Okay, so I want you to try the other two. Put them as a fraction over 100 and then reduce. When you're ready, you can start the video back up. Okay, so I have 25 out of 100. thinking about what common factor is between 25 and 100. And actually, I can do 25. So I'm going to divide both the top and the bottom by 25. And I get 1 out of 4. Now, if you didn't see 25 right away, maybe you saw 5. That's okay. Just make sure you keep going until it can't get any smaller. So if you saw 5, you're going to say, well, 5 goes into 25 5 times, and 5 goes into 120 times. And now you're looking at what is common between 5 and 20, and I can take out 5 again, which would bring me down to 1 over 4. So as long as you keep going until the numbers can't go any smaller, it's okay if you don't get there in one step. Okay, and let's look at your last one here is 8 out of 100. And I can think 4. 4 goes into both 8 and 100. So 4 goes into 8 2 times. And 4 goes into 125 times. And there's nothing else common between 2 and 25 besides 1, which doesn't really help us get any smaller here. So I've reduced as much as I can. Okay, and finally, we have converting decimals to fractions. Well, again, our decimal portion of our number is how much I have, and I want to figure out what it is out of. And in a decimal, the out of is determined by the place value. So in this case, the 4 is in the tenths place, and so it's going to be 4 out of 10. And then again, I'm going to reduce as much as possible. So here I get 2 over 5. So I want you to try the next two. Pause the video, start it up again when you're ready. Okay, so here I have 75, and the 5 is in the hundredths place. So I'm going to put it over 100, and then I need to reduce, and I see that 25 can go into both 75 and 100. 25 goes into 75 3 times and into 100 4 times. So 3/4 is my reduced fraction. Okay, and here I have 12.5. Well, a whole number in a fraction goes right out front. So I'm going to stick the 12 out front. And then I have 5 out of 10, which can be reduced to 1/2, so 12 and a half. Now you could also have written this as 125 over 10. And then you'd have to put it into a mixed number, and you would end up getting the same thing that I got here. So whether you write it as 12 and 5/10 or 125 over 10, you should get the same answer. Okay, so I want you to reflect back over how you've done in this video. Give yourself a thumbs down, a fingers pointed, or a thumbs up. Thumbs up being, I can convert between fractions, decimal percentages. I don't need any more help or practice. The pointed finger is I need more practice doing this. And thumbs down is I have trouble converting and I need some help.